The stagecoach crested the last ridge above Ruby Gulch just as the September sun broke through storm clouds, and Rose Holloway pressed her gloved hand against the window glass to look upon the place that had swallowed her father whole. She had traveled 11 days from Columbus, Ohio, with nothing but a leather satchel, a folded deed, and a grief so heavy it sat in her chest like a stone. Her father, Elias Holloway, had come west 3 years before with promises of letters that would explain everything once he struck it rich. The letters had come, fewer each season, until they stopped altogether. Then came the telegram from a lawyer in Denver informing her that Elias Holloway had died of a fever in the spring, leaving behind a silver claim in the San Juan Mountains of Colorado Territory, and a daughter who was now, whether she liked it or not, the sole owner of the Holloway Star Mine. She was 26 years old, unmarried and utterly alone in the world, and she had sold the family house in Ohio for the fair West because there was nothing left there worth staying for. The stagecoach rattled down into the gulch, past tents and half-built cabins, past a row of saloons with false fronts, past men who stopped what they were doing to stare at the woman stepping down from the coach in her traveling dress, dust-streaked but still finer than anything most of them had seen since the last supply wagon came through. Rose straightened her spine, lifted her chin, and walked toward the assay office as though she had not spent the last 2 nights sleeping upright in a jolting coach with her heart hammering at every strange sound in the dark. The clerk at the assay office was a narrow man with ink-stained fingers who looked at her deed with obvious skepticism. "You're saying you're Elias Holloway's daughter," he said, not quite a question. "I am saying it because it is true," Rose answered. "I have the deed, the letters, and the lawyer's papers from Denver. I would like to know where my father's claim lies, and I would like to know it before nightfall." The clerk exchanged a glance with a man lounging near the stove, a broad-shouldered fellow in a black coat who had not been introduced but who studied Rose with the particular attention of a man calculating a price. "The Holloway claim is up past Widow Creek," the clerk said slowly. "Good ground, from what I hear. Silas Crane there has been asking after it since your father passed. Offered to buy it fair more than once." "It is not for sale," Rose said. "Not to Mr. Crane, not to anyone. I have come a very long way to see what my father left me, and I intend to see it." Silas Crane rose from his chair by the stove with the easy confidence of a man who had never once been told no and believed it. He was handsome in a hard sort of way, his mustache neatly trimmed, his boots too clean for a mining camp. "Miss Holloway," he said, tipping his hat. "A woman alone has no business up in that country. It's rough ground, rougher men. I would be glad to make you an offer that would see you comfortable back east within the month." "I did not come 3,000 miles to be comfortable back east, Mr. Crane," Rose said. "I came to see what is mine." She left the office with her chin still lifted, though her hands trembled at her sides, and it was only when she reached the boardwalk outside that she allowed herself to breathe. The claim was 2 hours' ride into the mountains, the clerk had said, along a trail that grew rough enough that few wagons attempted it. She had no horse, no rifle, no notion of how to survive a single night in that wilderness, and yet she had come too far to turn back now. She hired the only horse for rent in Ruby Gulch, an aging bay mare with a placid temperament, and set off up the trail with the sun already beginning its slow slide toward the western peaks, because she could not bear one more night in a town full of men who looked at her the way Silas Crane had looked at her. The trail climbed through stands of aspen gone gold with the turning season, past granite outcroppings streaked with quartz, along a creek that ran cold and fast over stones worn smooth by 1,000 years of snowmelt. Rose had never seen mountains like these, so much larger and more silent than anything in Ohio, and despite her exhaustion, she found herself staring up at the peaks with something like awe mixed into her grief. It was the falling light that undid her plans. The trail forked twice with no marker, and by the time she realized she had taken the wrong branch, the sun had dropped behind the ridge and the temperature had fallen with it. The mare grew nervous, ears swiveling at sounds Rose could not identify, and somewhere off in the darkening timber a wolf, or something very like one, let out a long howl that raised the hair on her arms. She was still trying to decide whether to press on or turn back when the mare shied hard at a shape stepping out from between two boulders, and Rose was thrown from the saddle onto a bed of pine needles and rock, the wind knocked clean out of her lungs. For a moment she could not move, could not breathe, could only stare up at the darkening sky and wonder if this was how her father had felt in his last hours, alone in a place too big for any one person to survive. Then a shadow fell over her and a voice, low and rough as gravel but not unkind, said, "Easy now, don't try to sit up yet. Let me see if anything's broken." Rose blinked up at the man kneeling beside her. He was enormous, or seemed so from where she lay, with shoulders that blocked out what remained of the sky and forearms bared by rolled sleeves that showed muscle built from years of hard labor rather than any gymnasium. His hair was dark and longer than city fashion allowed, falling to his collar and pushed back from a face weathered by sun and wind, a face that might have been called handsome if it were not so guarded. A rifle lay in the grass beside him where he had set it down before kneeling. "I am not hurt," Rose managed, though her ribs protested when she drew breath. "Only startled. You should not creep up on people in the dark, sir." "I did not creep," the man said. "I have been standing at that rock for the better part of a minute, wondering if you were lost or simply foolish enough to be riding this trail at dusk with no rifle and no companion." "I am not foolish," Rose said, struggling to sit up despite his hand hovering to stop her. "I am looking for the Holloway claim up past Widow Creek. I am Rose Holloway. Elias Holloway was my father." Something shifted in the man's expression, a flicker of recognition, and unless she imagined it, sorrow. "I knew your father," he said. "Owen Slater. I have a cabin not far from here up toward the ridge. I helped Elias more than once when the winters got hard. I am sorry for your loss, Miss Holloway." He was a good man, for all his bad luck with cards and worse luck with his lungs. Rose felt tears sting her eyes, unexpected and unwelcome, because she had not cried since the telegram arrived and had told herself firmly that she would not cry now, not in front of a stranger in the middle of the wilderness. "You knew him," she repeated. "Then you can tell me, was he happy here? Did he suffer at the end?" Owen Slater was quiet a moment, and when he spoke again his voice had gentled further. "He missed you something fierce, if that answers what you are truly asking. Talked about his daughter in Ohio every chance he got. As for suffering, the fever took him quick in his sleep in his own bed. I was there the night before. He was not alone, Miss Holloway, if that is any comfort." It was more comfort than she had expected to find on a dark mountainside with a stranger, and she pressed her gloved fingers to her eyes to stop the tears from spilling. "Thank you," she said, "for telling me, and for not lying to make it easier." "I do not hold much with lying," Owen said. He rose and offered his hand, and when she took it, she felt the calluses across his palm, the sheer strength in the grip that lifted her to her feet as though she weighed nothing at all. "Your horse has wandered off toward my place, seems like. Good thing, since you would not have found the claim in the dark regardless. Come on. I will feed you, and in the morning I will ride you up to see what is yours." Rose hesitated, some instinct of propriety warning her against following a strange man into the darkness, but exhaustion and cold and the strange comfort of his words about her father overrode her caution, and she followed him along a narrow path she would never have found on her own. Owen Slater's cabin sat in a clearing ringed by spruce, a solid structure of hewn logs with a stone chimney and a linta for the horses, more substantial than she had expected from a man who lived so far from town. Inside, a fire already smoldering in the hearth, he built it up quickly and set a pot to warming, moving with the easy efficiency of a man long accustomed to caring for himself and needing no help to do it. "You live here alone," Rose said, taking in the single chair, the narrow bed, the shelf of well-worn books that surprised her more than anything else in the room. "Have for 6 years, Owen said. Came out from Missouri after the war. Trapped for a spell, then took to prospecting when the silver started coming out of these mountains. Never struck anything worth much myself, but I know this country better than most, and I have made a peace with being alone in it." "You do not seem the sort of man who is often alone by choice," Rose said before she could stop herself. Owen glanced at her, something unreadable passing behind his eyes. "I was married once. Back in Missouri before the war took most everything I cared about. I do not talk on it much." Rose recognized the shape of grief in his voice, the same shape her own grief had taken these past months, and she did not press him further, only nodded and accepted the bowl of beans and salt pork he offered her, and found it the best meal she had eaten in 11 days of travel. That night Owen gave her his own bed and took a blanket by the fire himself, refusing her protests with a firmness that brooked no argument, and Rose lay awake a long while listening to the wind in the spruce and the strange comfort of not being entirely alone in the wilderness, before sleep finally claimed her. She woke to the smell of coffee and the gray light of early morning through the cabin's single window, and found Owen already outside, saddling the mare that had indeed wandered to his corral in the night, alongside a rangy gray gelding that was clearly his own. The ride to the Holloway claim took the better part of an hour, up a switchback trail that climbed steadily through timber before opening onto a rocky bench, where a modest cabin stood alongside a mine entrance shored up with timber, a rusted ore cart sitting abandoned on its rails. Rose sat her horse in silence for a long moment, looking at the place her father had died reaching for, the place that had cost him everything and given him, in the end, only a fever and a lonely death. "This is it," Owen said quietly. "Holloway Star. Your father named it that himself, said it was the star that would guide him home to you someday." Rose swallowed hard against the lump in her throat and swung down from the mare's back without waiting for Owen's help. She walked to the cabin door, weathered and slightly warped, and pushed it open to find a single room, sparse but not squalid, a bed, a table, a shelf of tools, and on that shelf, carefully wrapped in oilcloth, a stack of letters addressed to her that had never been sent. She sat on the edge of her father's bed and read them one by one while Owen waited outside, giving her the privacy to grieve without an audience. And by the time she emerged, red-eyed but steadier, the sun had climbed well past mid-morning. "He wrote that he was close," she told Owen, holding the letters against her chest. "Close to finding a real vein, not just the scattered ore he had been working. He believed it right up to the end." "There is decent ore in that shaft," Owen said. "I have seen the samples he brought down to the assay office myself. Whether there is a true vein worth the labor of finding it, I could not say for certain. Silver mining is as much luck as sweat, Miss Holloway." "Then I intend to find out," Rose said, "whether it is luck or sweat that is required, because I do not intend to leave this ground to men like Silas Crane, who would rather buy my father's dying wish out from under me than see a woman succeed at something he believes belongs to men alone." Owen's jaw tightened at the name. "Crane has been sniffing around this claim since before your father died. He runs with a rough crowd, men who do not always trouble themselves with the law when they want something badly enough. You should know that before you decide to stay." "I intend to stay regardless," Rose said, and something in her voice, some steel she had not known she possessed until that moment, seemed to settle something in Owen Slater's expression, a decision he had perhaps been weighing since he first found her sprawled in the pine needles the night before. "Then you will need help," he said simply. "This is no country for a woman alone, not because you lack the will for it, but because the ground itself does not care how much will a person has. I will teach you what your father never got the chance to teach you, and I will make certain Crane and his men understand that this claim is not sitting here undefended." Rose studied him, this stranger who had appeared out of the darkness the night before and who now offered, with no expectation of payment, to stand between her and whatever dangers this wilderness and its men might pose. "Why would you do this for me, Mr. Slater? You do not know me. I am nothing to you." Owen considered the question longer than she expected, his gaze moving from her face out toward the mountains beyond, before he answered. Your father was a friend when I had few enough of them. I owe him that much, to see his daughter safely settled. And besides, he added, a faint, reluctant smile touching the corner of his mouth for the first time since she had met him, I have a feeling you would find a way to get into trouble with or without my help, and I would rather be nearby when it happens. Rose felt an answering warmth she was not prepared for, a small ember of something lighter than grief kindling in her chest, and she told herself firmly that it was only gratitude, only relief at not being entirely alone, and nothing more than that. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm Rose could not have imagined a month before. She moved into her father's cabin, scrubbing it clean of dust and neglect, planting a small garden of hardy vegetables in the thin mountain soil behind the structure, and each morning Owen rode up from his own cabin to show her the workings of the mine, how to shore up timber, how to read the color of ore in the lantern light, how to load and fire the old Henry rifle her father had left behind in case of bears, or worse. She proved a quick study, quicker than Owen had expected. He admitted to her one afternoon as they broke for a midday meal at the mine entrance, sharing bread and cheese he had brought up from town. Most folks who come out here green get themselves hurt or discouraged within a month, he said. You have neither hurt yourself badly nor once complained, and I have watched you work a full day at the windlass without a rest that most grown men would have taken twice over. I have grief to work off, Rose said simply. It seems to burn hotter than tiredness most days. Owen looked at her a long moment, something thoughtful in his expression. Grief does that for a while. Eventually it settles into something you carry instead of something that carries you. I cannot tell you when that happens. I am still waiting myself some days. Your wife, Rose said gently. Will you tell me what happened to her? Owen was quiet long enough that Rose thought he might refuse, but eventually he spoke, his eyes fixed on the mountains rather than on her. Her name was Mary. We were married 2 years before the war took me east. When I came home, the farm was burned, and she had died of the same fever that took half the county that winter. I was not there. I have spent a good many years since then telling myself it would not have mattered if I had been, but I have never quite believed it. I am sorry, Rose said, and meant it fully. That is a heavy thing to carry alone in these mountains. It is lighter than it was, Owen admitted, glancing at her then with an expression she could not quite name, something warmer than mere friendliness. Lighter than it has been in some time, if I am honest. Rose felt her cheeks warm and looked away toward the ore cart, busying her hands with tasks that did not need doing, and neither of them spoke of it further that day, though something had shifted between them, some unspoken understanding that neither was quite ready to name. It was 3 weeks into her tenure at the Holloway Star that the first trouble came. Rose woke before dawn to the sound of her mare screaming in the small corral behind the cabin, and she was out the door with the Henry rifle in hand before she had fully processed what had woken her. In the gray pre-dawn light she could make out 2 figures at the corral fence, one of them holding a lantern too close to the mare's flank, the other working at the gate latch. "Get away from my horse," Rose called out, her voice steadier than she felt, the rifle raised though her hands shook. The men startled, and one of them laughed, low and mean. "Easy now, Miss Holloway. We are not here to hurt the horse, just came to look the place over. Mr. Crane sends his regards, and his hope that you will reconsider his offer before something worse than a scared horse comes calling. Tell Mr. Crane," Rose said, forcing steel into her voice, "that I have already given him my answer and it has not changed." The second man, taller and broader than the first, took a step toward her, and Rose's finger tightened on the trigger, though she prayed she would not need to fire, prayed even harder that she would not miss if she did. It was the sound of hooves pounding up the trail that stopped him, and moments later Owen Slater came through the trees on his gray gelding, rifle already in hand, his expression carved from granite. "You two have exactly as long as it takes me to count to 5 to be off this claim," Owen said, his voice carrying none of the roughness she had heard from him before, only a cold, absolute certainty that made both intruders take an involuntary step backward. 1, 2. He did not need to reach 5. The two men scrambled for their horses, tethered at the edge of the trees, and were gone into the brightening morning within moments, leaving only the sound of retreating hoofbeats and the mare's slowly calming snorts. Owen swung down from his horse and crossed to Rose in 3 long strides, taking the rifle gently from her trembling hands and setting it aside before drawing her, without asking permission, into an embrace that she did not resist. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice rough against her hair. "Did they touch you?" "No," Rose managed, her face pressed against the solid warmth of his chest, feeling for the first time in weeks how very tired she was of being brave alone. "They frightened the horse and made threats on Crane's behalf, but they did not touch me." Owen held her a moment longer than strictly necessary, his arms strong and sure around her, and Rose found herself reluctant to step back when he finally released her, though propriety demanded she do so. "I should have been here," Owen said, his jaw tight with something between anger and self-recrimination. "I will not make that mistake twice. From now on, I am moving my gear up here, into the lean-to at least, until we settle this business with Crane once and for all." "Owen, I cannot ask that of you," Rose protested, though the offer settled something anxious in her chest that she had not fully acknowledged until he made it. "Your own claim, your own cabin." "You are not asking," Owen said firmly. "I am telling you. A woman alone on a contested claim in this country is an invitation to exactly the sort of trouble you just faced. I will not have it, Rose, not while I have breath to prevent it." It was the first time he had used her given name, and something in the way he said it, low and certain, sent a warmth through her that had nothing to do with the rising sun. "Very well," she said softly. "I would be grateful for the company if I am honest. This mountain gets very quiet at night, when a person has only grief and worry to keep them company." Owen's expression gentled, and for a moment Rose thought he might reach for her again, but instead he simply nodded and turned to see to the horses, leaving Rose to wonder at the strange new tenderness blooming in her chest amid all the fear and uncertainty of the morning. Owen was as good as his word. Within the day he had moved a bedroll and a few essentials into the lean-to attached to the cabin, close enough to hear if trouble came calling again, but respectful enough of her reputation and comfort not to presume upon the cabin itself. Rose found herself, in the days that followed, looking forward to the evenings when he would return from checking his trap lines or working the mine alongside her, when they would share a meal by the fire and talk of small things, the shape of the clouds over the peaks, the taste of the wild raspberries she had found near the creek, the books on his shelf that he had, at her request, begun bringing up one at a time for her to read by lamplight. It was during one such evening, some 10 days after the incident at the corral, that Owen finally spoke of what troubled him most. "Crane will not stop at scaring a horse," he said, staring into the fire, his forearms braced on his knees. "He has too much invested in wanting this claim. There is talk in town that he represents a mining syndicate out of Denver, men with real money who believe there is a vein under this mountain worth far more than any single claim's worth of ore. If that is true, he will not give up simply because his first attempt failed." "What would you have me do?" Rose asked. "I cannot simply hand over my father's claim because a syndicate believes it is worth stealing." "I would not ask you to," Owen said, turning to look at her, firelight dancing across the strong lines of his face. "But we should be prepared for this to escalate before it resolves. I want you to know how to defend yourself properly, not just with a rifle in a moment of fear, but with confidence should it come to that. And I want to go to town myself, speak with the land office, make certain your claim is properly and legally recorded so there can be no question of its validity should Crane try to challenge it through paper rather than force." "You would do that for me?" Rose asked, though by now she had come to expect nothing less from him. "I would do considerably more than that for you," Owen said, and something in his voice made Rose's breath catch. some depth of feeling he had not spoken aloud before but which hung in the air between them, undeniable now that it had been given even that much voice. Rose looked at him across the firelight, this man who had appeared out of the darkness a month before, and who had, in that short time, become the steadiest presence in her life since her father's death, and she felt something inside her that she had thought grief had burned away entirely, the fragile, frightening beginnings of hope, and beneath it, something warmer still. "Owen," she said softly, "I do not know how to thank you properly for all you have done." "I do not require thanks," he said, his voice rough. "I require only that you stay safe, and that you know you are not facing this alone, not while I am able to stand beside you." They sat in silence a while longer, the fire crackling between them, and though neither spoke further of the feeling growing between them, both understood in that quiet mountain evening that something had changed beyond mere friendship, something neither was yet ready to name but which neither wished to deny. The trip to town came 2 days later. Owen insisted Rose accompany him rather than remain alone at the claim, and so they rode down together into Ruby Gulch on a crisp autumn morning, the aspens along the trail having turned entirely to gold in the weeks since her arrival. The land office confirmed what Rose had hoped. Her father's claim had been properly filed and recorded, with clear title passing to her as his sole heir under the laws of the territory. The clerk, a different man than before, more sympathetic to her situation once he understood the threats she had faced, assured her that any attempt by Crane or his syndicate to challenge the claim through legal means would fail for lack of any legitimate grounds. "That does not mean he will not try other means," the clerk added grimly, echoing Owen's own warnings. "Silas Crane is not a man accustomed to losing, Miss Holloway. I would advise caution." They were leaving the land office when they encountered Crane himself, stepping out of the assay office across the street with 2 of his men flanking him, the same broad-shouldered fellow from the corral incident among them, Rose noted with a chill. "Miss Holloway," Crane said, tipping his hat with false courtesy. "And Mr. Slater. I hear you have taken up residence at the Holloway claim, Slater, quite the devoted neighbor." "I hear your men paid a visit to that claim recently," Owen said, his voice deceptively mild though Rose could feel the tension radiating from him like heat from a stove. "Frightened a horse, made threats. I would advise you to keep your men away from Miss Holloway's property from here forward, Crane, or you will find me considerably less patient about it than the law might be." Crane's smile did not waver, though something cold entered his eyes. "I do not know what you are referring to, Slater." "My men conduct themselves properly, as far as I am aware. Perhaps Miss Holloway was mistaken about who she encountered in the dark." "I was not mistaken," Rose said firmly, stepping forward despite Owen's protective hand rising slightly beside her. "And I would ask you, Mr. Crane, to cease these attempts to frighten me off my father's land. I have filed proper title, I have witnesses to your men's trespass, and I have no intention of selling, now or ever, regardless of how much your syndicate believes that ground is worth." For a moment something dangerous flickered across Crane's face, quickly masked behind his practiced charm. "A pity," he said softly. "I had hoped we might resolve this as civilized people. It seems we shall have to see how the matter unfolds instead." He tipped his hat once more and moved off down the boardwalk with his men, and Rose felt the tension drain from her shoulders only once he had disappeared from sight. "That was either very brave or very foolish," Owen said, though there was something like admiration in his voice. "Perhaps a bit of both," Rose admitted. "But I meant every word, Owen. I will not be frightened off what is mine." "No," Owen agreed, looking at her with an expression that made her heart beat faster despite the fear still coursing through her. "I do not believe you will." They spent the remainder of the day provisioning at the general store, and it was there, amid sacks of flour and coils of rope, that Rose first heard mention of the harvest dance planned for the following week, a tradition among the mining camp's residents to celebrate the changing season before winter closed the high passes. "You should attend," Owen said unexpectedly, as they loaded their purchases onto the pack mule he had brought for the trip. "It would do you good to see the town at its best, rather than only its worst. And," he added, a slight color rising in his weathered cheeks that Rose found unexpectedly endearing, "I would be glad to escort you if you would allow it." Rose felt her own cheeks warm in response, surprised and pleased by the invitation. "I would like that very much, Owen. It has been a long time since I attended any sort of dance." "Then it is settled," Owen said, and something in the way he smiled at her then, unguarded for once, made Rose's breath catch in a way that had nothing to do with fear of Sela's Crane or anything at all but the simple, dizzying realization that she was falling in love with Owen Slater. The week leading up to the dance passed with the ordinary rhythms of claim work: ore hauled and sorted, timber shored, the mare and gelding fed and groomed each morning. But underneath it all ran a current of anticipation that Rose could not entirely suppress. A warmth she felt every time Owen glanced her way across the mine entrance or reached to steady her when her footing slipped on loose rock. She had brought only 2 dresses from Ohio suitable for anything beyond daily labor, and she spent an evening carefully pressing the better of the 2, a deep green wool that had been her mother's before her, adjusting the fit slightly with a needle and thread borrowed from the mercantile, wanting, though she would not have admitted it aloud, to look her best for a man who had seen her covered in mine dust and exhausted from labor, and had somehow found her worth defending regardless. The night of the dance arrived clear and cold, stars scattered thick across the mountain sky as Owen brought the wagon up to the cabin, having borrowed it from a neighboring claim for the occasion. He had shaved and trimmed his hair slightly, though it still fell longer than town fashion favored, and he wore a clean shirt that stretched across the breadth of his shoulders in a way that made Rose's mouth go dry when she stepped out of the cabin to meet him. "You look beautiful, Rose," he said simply, offering his hand to help her up onto the wagon seat, and the words, plain and unadorned as they were, meant more to her than any flowery compliment she had ever received back in Ohio. "You look rather fine yourself, Owen Slater," she said, and was rewarded with that same rare, unguarded smile that she had come to treasure. The dance was held in the largest structure in Ruby Gulch, a barn belonging to the freight company, swept clean and strung with lanterns for the occasion, a fiddler and a man with a guitar providing music while nearly every resident of the camp, and a fair number from the surrounding claims, crowded in to celebrate the harvest and the coming of autumn. Rose had feared she might feel out of place, the newcomer, the woman who owned a contested claim, but she found instead that most of the townsfolk greeted her warmly, curious about her father and sympathetic to her loss, and by the time Owen led her onto the floor for the first dance, she felt lighter than she had in months. "I have not danced since before my father left for the territories," she admitted as Owen's arm settled around her waist, his hand warm and sure against her back. "Then I am honored to be your partner for the occasion," Owen said, and though his steps were somewhat rusty, having clearly not danced in some years himself, there was a careful tenderness in the way he held her, as though she were something precious he was afraid of handling too roughly. They danced twice more before Owen excused himself to fetch refreshments, and Rose found herself standing near the barn's open door, enjoying the cool night air after the warmth of dancing, when Sela's Crane approached, uninvited and unwelcome. "Miss Holloway," he said, his voice smooth as ever though something harder lurked beneath it, "I confess I am surprised to see you looking so at ease, given the circumstances." "I do not know what circumstances you refer to, Mr. Crane," Rose said coolly, "beyond your own men trespassing on my property and threatening my livestock. I refer to the fact that you are relying on a mountain trapper to defend a claim worth considerably more than he could ever hope to offer you in protection," Crane said. "Slater is a capable enough woodsman, I grant you, but he is one man, Miss Holloway, and I represent considerably more resources than one man's rifle and good intentions." "Then it is fortunate," Rose said, her voice steady despite the anger building in her chest, that I do not measure a man's worth by the resources he commands, but by his character. Owen Slater has shown me more decency in 1 month than you have managed in our few brief encounters, Mr. Crane, and I would ask that you leave me be for the remainder of this evening." Crane's expression darkened, the mask of charm slipping momentarily to reveal something colder beneath. "You would do well to reconsider your position before winter closes those passes, Miss Holloway. A woman alone on a mountain with only a trapper for protection faces a great many dangers that a wise person might wish to avoid." "Is that a threat, Crane?" Owen's voice cut through the space between them, and Rose turned to find him returned from fetching refreshments, his expression thunderous, 2 cups of punch set aside on a nearby barrel as his hands curled into fists at his sides. "Merely an observation," Crane said smoothly, though he took an involuntary step backward at the sight of Owen's expression. "Good evening to you both." He melted back into the crowd, and Owen turned immediately to Rose, his anger giving way to concern. "Did he threaten you directly?" "Tell me exactly what he said." "He implied that winter would bring dangers I might wish to avoid," Rose said. "It was a threat, Owen, however carefully worded." Owen's jaw tightened, and for a moment Rose saw something dangerous in his eyes, a protectiveness that went beyond mere obligation to a departed friend's memory. "He will not touch you, Rose, I swear it. Whatever he intends, he will have to go through me first, and I do not intend to make that easy for him." "I know," Rose said softly, reaching up to lay her hand against his chest, feeling the solid strength of him beneath her palm, the rapid beat of his heart that matched her own. "I trust you, Owen. More than I have trusted anyone since my father died." Owen covered her hand with his own, larger and rougher, and for a long moment they simply stood there, the music and laughter of the dance fading into background noise, until finally Owen spoke, his voice low and rough with feeling. "Rose, I need to tell you something, and I would understand if it changes things between us, given how recently you have lost your father, given all you have been through. But I find that I cannot keep pretending this is merely obligation or friendship that keeps me at your side. I have come to care for you, Rose Holloway, more deeply than I intended or expected, and I did not think I would ever feel this way again after losing Mary." Rose felt her heart swell with an emotion so intense it nearly stole her breath entirely. "Owen, I feel the same. I have felt it growing for weeks now, though I told myself it was only gratitude, only relief at not being alone. But it is more than that, so much more." Owen's hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb tracing gently along her jaw, and Rose leaned into the touch, into the warmth and strength of him, as he lowered his head slowly, giving her every chance to step back if she wished it, though she did not wish it at all. Their first kiss was soft, hesitant at first, as though both were afraid of moving too quickly after so much loss and uncertainty, but it deepened as Rose's arms rose to wrap around his neck, as Owen's other hand settled at the small of her back, drawing her closer, and when they finally broke apart, both were breathless, both smiling in a way that felt entirely new after months of grief and struggle. "I did not expect to find this," Rose whispered, "not here, not now, in the middle of all this trouble with Crane." "Nor did I," Owen admitted, "but I find I am grateful for it regardless, Rose. Whatever comes with Crane and his syndicate, I would rather face it with you beside me than face anything alone again." They returned to the dance floor for the remainder of the evening, and if the other residents of Ruby Gulch noticed the new warmth between the mountain man and the Silver Claim's owner, none remarked upon it beyond a few knowing smiles from the older women who had seen enough of the world to recognize love blooming when it appeared before them. The weeks following the dance brought a new tenderness to Rose and Owen's daily routine, stolen moments between the labor of the mine, a hand lingering a moment longer than necessary when passing tools, quiet conversations by the fire that stretched later into the night as neither wished to end the day and return to their separate sleeping arrangements. Owen remained scrupulously respectful of Rose's reputation, never presuming beyond what she offered freely, but the growing love between them was evident to anyone who spent time in their company. In the way Owen's eyes softened whenever Rose entered a room. In the way Rose found herself humming as she worked, something she had not done since her father left for the territories years before. But even as their love deepened, the threat from Sela's crane did not diminish. Reports filtered up from town of increased activity among Crane's men, strangers seen scouting the trails near the Holloway claim, and Owen grew increasingly watchful, taking to sleeping with his rifle within arm's reach and insisting Rose never venture beyond the immediate claim area without him at her side. The blow, when it came, arrived not through violence but through paper, precisely as the land office clerk had warned might happen. A rider arrived at the claim on a gray October morning, bearing a formal notice from the territorial court in Denver, filed by Sela's Crane Syndicate, alleging that the original survey of the Holloway claim had been improperly conducted, that the boundary markers had been placed in error, and that a significant portion of the claim, including the section containing the most promising ore samples, in fact belonged to an adjacent claim held by the syndicate itself. "This is nonsense," Rose said, reading through the notice with mounting fury as Owen looked over her shoulder, his expression grim. "My father's claim was surveyed properly when he first filed it. I saw the original documents myself at the land office." "Crane knows that as well as we do," Owen said. "This is not about the survey being accurate. This is about tying you up in court proceedings expensive and time-consuming enough that you eventually give up and sell rather than fight it. Syndicates like his have done this before in other camps. They have lawyers on retainer, money for filing fees, time to wait out a claimant who has neither." "Then what would you have me do?" Rose asked, fear creeping into her voice for the first time in weeks. "I cannot afford a lawyer of my own, Owen. What little money I brought from Ohio has gone toward supplies and tools." "We will find a way," Owen said firmly, taking her hands in his own. "I have some savings set aside from years of trapping and prospecting. It is not much, but it may be enough to secure a lawyer in Denver who can review the original survey and testify to its accuracy. And I know men in this territory, old friends from my trapping days, who owe me favors and who know this land and its history well enough to speak on your behalf if needed." "Owen, I cannot ask you to spend your savings on my legal troubles," Rose protested, though the offer moved her deeply. "You are not asking," Owen said again, echoing his words from weeks before when he had insisted on moving into the lean-to. "I am offering because I love you, Rose Holloway, and because I will not stand by and watch Sela's crane steal what your father died trying to build for you. We will fight this together, whatever it costs." It was the first time either of them had spoken the word love aloud between them, and despite the fear and anger churning in her chest over Crane's legal maneuvering, Rose felt a surge of warmth at hearing it. "I love you too, Owen," she said softly, "more than I know how to say properly. And I am grateful, more than I can express, for everything you have done and continue to do for me." They rode to town together the following day to consult with the land office clerk, who confirmed their suspicions that the survey challenge was almost certainly a delaying tactic rather than a legitimate dispute, but who also warned that fighting it properly would require testimony from the original surveyor, a man named Hutchins who had since moved to a mining camp some 50 miles distant, and possibly a formal resurvey conducted by an independent party. All of which would take weeks if not longer to arrange. "In the meantime," the clerk added grimly, "the notice creates a cloud on your title, Miss Holloway. It will not stop you from working the claim, but it may complicate any attempt to sell ore or secure further investment until the matter is resolved." Rose left the land office with her jaw set, and her resolve hardened rather than diminished by the obstacles ahead. "We will find this surveyor," she told Owen as they walked back toward where they had tethered their horses. "We will get his testimony, and we will fight this in whatever court Crane wishes to drag us through, however long it takes." "That is the woman I fell in love with," Owen said, pride evident in his voice despite the gravity of their circumstances, and Rose felt her resolve strengthen further at his words. They spent the following 2 weeks in a flurry of activity, Owen riding the 50 miles to the distant mining camp to secure Surveyor Hutchins's sworn statement regarding the original survey, while Rose continued working the claim alone during his absence, more confident now in her own abilities after months of Owen's careful instruction, though she kept the Henry rifle close at all times and startled at every unfamiliar sound in the darkness. It was during Owen's absence that Crane made his boldest move yet. Rose woke on a frigid November morning, frost thick on the ground outside, to find 3 men already at the mine entrance when she stepped out to begin her day's work, none of them familiar, all of them armed and clearly intent on more than mere intimidation this time. "Miss Holloway," the eldest of the 3 said, a grizzled man with a scar across one cheek who carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to violence. "Mr. Crane has authorized us to take possession of this claim on behalf of the syndicate, pending resolution of the boundary dispute currently before the territorial court. We would ask that you vacate the premises peacefully." "You have no legal authority to do any such thing," Rose said, her heart pounding but her voice steady, the rifle in her hands though she had not yet raised it. "The dispute is still pending. No court has ruled in your favor, and until one does, this claim remains mine." "We were not asking permission," the man said, and behind him his 2 companions moved to flank her, one circling toward the cabin, the other toward the mine entrance itself, clearly intent on taking physical possession regardless of the law's actual standing on the matter. Rose raised the rifle then, her hand steadier than she felt, and leveled it at the grizzled leader. "I will not ask twice. Leave this claim, or I will use this rifle, and I assure you I have been well taught in how to make it count." For a moment the standoff held, tense and dangerous, and Rose genuinely did not know whether she could bring herself to fire on another human being, even in defense of her father's legacy, but she prayed her resolve would hold if it came to that. It was the sound of hoofbeats, fast and urgent, that broke the standoff, and moments later Owen Slater came through the trees at a full gallop, having returned from his journey to find trouble at the claim, his own rifle already raised as he approached. "Get away from her," Owen roared, a sound so fierce that even the grizzled leader took an involuntary step backward. "Or I swear before God I will put a bullet in each of you before you take another step toward that cabin." The 3 men exchanged glances, clearly weighing their odds against a man whose reputation for capability in these mountains was evidently well known even to strangers, and after a tense moment the leader raised his hand slightly, a gesture of temporary surrender rather than genuine capitulation. "This is not finished," he said, backing toward where their horses were tethered at the tree line. "Mr. Crane will not simply let this matter drop, Slater. You know that as well as I do." "Then he can come discuss it with me directly," Owen said, "rather than sending men to threaten an unarmed woman while I am away. Tell him that, and tell him also that the next men he sends onto this claim will not leave it standing upright." The 3 men mounted and rode off, and Owen swung down from his own horse the moment they disappeared, crossing to Rose in swift strides and pulling her into an embrace so fierce it nearly lifted her from her feet. "I should never have left you alone," he said, his voice rough with fear and relief mingled together. "I am sorry, Rose. I should have found another way to secure Hutchins's testimony without leaving you unprotected." "You could not have known they would come while you were gone," Rose said, though she clung to him just as tightly, the fear of the confrontation finally catching up with her now that the danger had passed. "And I handled it, Owen. I did not fire, but I held them off until you arrived. Your teaching prepared me for that moment, even if I hope never to face it again." "You should not have to face it at all," Owen said fiercely, pulling back slightly to look at her face, his hands framing her cheeks with a tenderness that belied the violence he had been prepared to commit moments before on her behalf. "Rose, I cannot keep living apart from you like this. worrying every moment I am away that Crane's men will return while I am not here to protect you. Marry me. Let me stand beside you, not just as a neighbor or a protector, but as your husband, with every right the law recognizes to defend what is ours together." Rose's breath caught, tears springing to her eyes at the suddenness and sincerity of the proposal, offered not with roses and careful staging, but in the aftermath of danger, born from a fear of losing her that Owen clearly could not bear to face again. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, Owen, I will marry you. I love you, and I would rather face every danger this mountain and Silas Crane can offer standing beside you as your wife than spend one more day wondering if you might have arrived too late." Owen's kiss was fierce and grateful and full of promise, and when they finally parted, both were smiling despite the tension of the morning's confrontation, a warmth blooming between them that no threat from Crane or his syndicate could diminish. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church that served Ruby Gulch's scattered population of believers, a modest ceremony attended by the handful of townsfolk who had grown fond of Rose during her months in the camp, and by Owen's old trapping friends who had ridden in from distant camps to witness their comrade finally finding happiness again after so many years of solitary grief. Rose wore her mother's green dress, carefully mended and pressed, and Owen wore a new shirt purchased for the occasion, his dark hair combed back though it still fell longer than fashion dictated. And when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Owen kissed his bride with a tenderness that brought tears to more than one eye among the small gathering. Surveyor Hutchins's sworn testimony arrived at the land office 3 days after the wedding, confirming beyond any reasonable doubt that the original survey of the Holloway claim had been conducted properly, and that the boundary markers were exactly where they had always been, precisely as Rose and Owen had known all along. Combined with testimony from Owen's old trapping friends, who knew the mountain terrain intimately enough to confirm the boundaries independently, the territorial court dismissed Crane's syndicate's challenge within a month, finding no merit whatsoever to the claim of surveying error. Silas Crane, faced with the collapse of his legal strategy and the very public failure of his men's attempt at intimidation, which several witnesses in town had by then heard about through the inevitable gossip of a small mining camp, found his standing in Ruby Gulch considerably diminished. The syndicate he represented, unwilling to continue funding an increasingly costly and publicly embarrassing effort to seize a claim they had no legitimate right to, recalled him to Denver within the month, and Rose and Owen heard no further trouble from that quarter for the remainder of that winter or any winter after. But even with the legal and physical threats finally resolved, the challenges of the Holloway Star Mine were not entirely behind them. The vain Elias Holloway had believed himself close to finding remained elusive through that first winter of Rose and Owen's marriage, the ore they extracted sufficient to sustain them, but never quite yielding the fortune her father had dreamed of on his deathbed. It was Owen, with his years of experience reading mountain terrain, who finally suggested in the spring following their wedding that the true vein might lie not deeper into the existing shaft, but at an angle her father had never considered, following a fault line visible in the rock formations above the claim that Owen had noticed during his years of trapping in the surrounding hills. They worked together through that spring and summer, expanding the mine along the new direction Owen had identified, and it was in July, nearly a full year after Rose had first arrived in Ruby Gulch grieving and alone, that they finally struck it. A vein of silver ore so rich that the assay office in town could scarcely believe the samples Rose brought down for testing, or that would, over the following years, transform the Holloway Star from a modest, contested claim into one of the most productive mines in the entire San Juan district. Rose stood in the mine entrance the day they confirmed the strike, Owen beside her with his arm around her shoulders, both of them covered in dust and sweat from the labor of extraction, and she found herself weeping, Not from grief this time, but from an overwhelming mixture of joy and vindication and love so profound it nearly stole her breath entirely. "He was right," she said softly, thinking of her father's final letters, his unwavering belief that the fortune he sought lay just beyond his reach. He knew it was here, Owen. He just needed a little more time, and someone who understood this mountain well enough to find the right direction. "He gave you something more valuable than silver in the end," Owen said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "He gave you the reason to come west to find this claim, to find me. Whatever silver comes out of this mountain now, Rose, it is not the finest thing your father left you. You are." Rose turned in his arms to kiss him properly then, standing in the mine entrance with silver ore glinting in the lantern light around them, and felt, for the first time since her father's death, that the grief which had once felt like an unbearable weight had finally settled into something she could carry alongside the profound joy of the life she had built in these mountains, alongside the man who had appeared out of the darkness a year before and had never once let her face this wilderness, or its dangers, alone. The years that followed brought prosperity to the Holloway Star mine, beyond anything Elias Holloway could have imagined when he first staked his claim in the San Juan Mountains. Rose and Owen expanded the operation carefully, hiring trustworthy men from the camp to assist with the labor, as the vein proved deeper and richer than they had initially estimated, always ensuring fair wages and decent treatment for those who worked alongside them, a reputation that made the Holloway Star a sought-after place of employment, even as other claims in the district struggled with the harsh boom-and-bust cycles common to mining camps of that era. Rose gave birth to their first child, a son they named Elias after her father, in the spring of 1879, in the very cabin where her father had once lived and died, though this time the cabin rang with joy rather than grief, with Owen's steady hands and gentle voice guiding the midwife's efforts, and holding his wife through the long hours of labor with the same fierce protectiveness he had shown her from their very first meeting on that dark mountain trail. Their daughter, Mary Rose, named for both Owen's first wife and for Rose herself, arrived 2 years later, followed by a second son, Thomas, in 1883. And the cabin that had once housed a lonely, dying prospector gradually expanded into a proper ranch house, as the mine's profits allowed, filled now with the laughter of children and the steady warmth of a marriage built on genuine partnership and deep, abiding love. Silas Crane was never heard from again in Ruby Gulch, though rumor eventually reached them through traveling merchants that his fortunes in Denver had soured considerably after his failed attempt to seize the Holloway claim became something of a cautionary tale among syndicate investors, a reminder that not every claim could be taken by force or legal maneuvering from those determined enough to defend what was rightfully theirs. Owen never did return to his old cabin near the ridge, choosing instead to make his permanent home with Rose at the Holloway Star, though he kept the old structure standing for years afterward, using it occasionally as a shelter during trapping expeditions. He continued to enjoy even as the mine's success meant he no longer needed to trap for survival, only for the simple pleasure of the wilderness he had always loved. On quiet evenings, once the children were settled and the day's labor finished, Rose and Owen would often sit together on the porch of their expanded ranch house, looking out over the mountains that had brought them together in such unexpected circumstances, and Rose would sometimes take out her father's old letters, worn soft now from years of rereading, and think of how strange and wonderful it was that grief and loss had led her, ultimately, to the deepest joy she had ever known. "Do you ever wonder," she asked Owen one such evening, some 8 years after their first meeting, as their 3 children played in the yard below, and the sun set gold over the peaks that had witnessed so much of their history together, "what might have happened if I had taken the other trail that first night? If we had never met at all?" Owen considered the question seriously, as he considered most things, before answering, his arm settling comfortably around her shoulders as it had 1,000 times over the years since. "I do not much care to wonder on it, Rose. This mountain has a way of bringing together what is meant to be together. I have come to believe, whatever paths it takes to get there. Your father named this claim the Holloway Star because he believed it would guide him home to you. I think, in the end, it did exactly that, just not in the way any of us expected. Rose leaned into his embrace, feeling the same solid strength and warmth that had first comforted her on that frightening night 8 years before, and looked out over the mountains that had become her home, the claim that had become her legacy, and the man who had made certain, through every threat and hardship, that no one could ever take any of it from her. "I love you, Owen Slater," she said softly, watching their children chase each other through the long evening shadows, the mine that had once cost her father his life now providing security and prosperity for the family they had built together against all odds. "I love you too, Rose Holloway Slater," Owen answered, pressing a kiss to her temple with the same tenderness he had shown her from that very first night. "Now, and for every year the good Lord sees fit to give us in these mountains together." And as the autumn stars began to emerge over the peaks of the San Juan Mountains, much as they had on that first frightening night when a grieving woman from Ohio had stumbled into the path of a solitary mountain man who would become her protector, her partner, and ultimately her husband, Rose Holloway Slater knew, with a certainty as solid as the silver ore still being drawn from the mountain that bore her father's dream, that she had finally, truly, found her way home.